When Yvette Prieto decided to celebrate her 11-year-old twin daughter's exceptional grades at a luxury restaurant, she never imagined that her moment of maternal pride would turn into a brutal lesson on prejudice. Victoria and Isabel Jordan, two innocent children celebrating their academic achievements, were humiliated and discriminated against by staff who judged their family as unfit to be there. But when an emotional call reached Michael Jordan, he made a decision that would shock the entire city. It was one of those golden spring mornings in Charlotte, North Carolina, when Yvette Prieto Jordan woke up with a sense of happiness she hadn't felt in a long time. On the kitchen table, neatly arranged, were the report cards of her twin daughters, Victoria and Isabel Jordan, just 11 years old. They weren't just good grades. They were exceptional results reflecting months of dedication, late night studying, and the commitment of two girls who had learned the value of hard work early on. Yvette held the papers with trembling hands, overwhelmed with pride, and for a moment allowed herself to feel the fullness of being a mother. "Girl," she called, her voice filled with joy. "Come here, I have a surprise for you." Victoria and Isabel came running down the stairs, still in pajamas, their hair tousled from sleep. They were beautiful in the way only happy children can be. Sparkling eyes, spontaneous smiles, the contagious energy of youth. "What is it, Mom?" asked Victoria, always the more impatient of the two. Yvette smiled and held out the report cards. "These grades. Girls, I'm so proud I feel like my heart is going to burst. You worked so hard, put in so much effort." Isabel, more reflective, looked at the numbers seriously. "We really did it, huh, Mom? Straight A's in every subject." "Yes, my love, you did. And do you know what that means?" Yvette paused dramatically. "Today is celebration day. We're going out for lunch. Anywhere you want." The twins looked at each other with that unique bond only siblings develop. For a moment, they communicated without words, and then Victoria whispered something into Isabel's ear. "Mom," said Isabel, with unusual shyness, "do you remember that restaurant Daddy mentioned the other day? Le Jardin? I heard him say it was very fancy." Yvette felt a slight hesitation form in her chest. Le Jardin was undoubtedly one of the most exclusive restaurants in Charlotte, a place where the city's elite gathered, where every detail was designed to impress, where the price of a main course equaled a week's salary for many families. But something inexplicable made her question whether it was appropriate to take the girls. It was a thought she was uncomfortable having, yet it lingered like a shadow in her mind. "Why am I hesitating?" she asked herself silently. "We can afford it, and my daughters deserve to see beautiful places." She decided she was being paranoid. After all, what kind of mother would she be if she denied her daughters a special celebration out of fear of what exactly? "Of course we can go to Le Jardin," she said, forcing enthusiasm into her voice. "You deserve the best. Let's get all dressed up for our special party." An hour and a half later, the three of them were in Yvette's black SUV, driving through Charlotte's tree-lined streets toward downtown. Yvette had chosen a navy blue midi dress, elegant but not flashy. The twins wore floral summer dresses, comfortable flats, their hair tied back in ponytails. Their outfits were age-appropriate, pretty, but without the pomp that some Le Jardin patrons considered proper. On the drive, they chatted excitedly about plans for summer vacation. Victoria wanted to visit her grandmother in Puerto Rico, while Isabel dreamed of a trip to Disney. It was a light-hearted conversation, full of laughter and childhood dreams, and it made Yvette feel lucky to have these simple, precious moments. "Mom," said Isabel, looking out the window as they neared downtown, "is the restaurant really that fancy?" "It is, sweetie, but just be yourselves, okay? We're a family like any other, just celebrating something special." Le Jardin was impressive at first sight. Located in a renovated historic building, its facade combined old red brick with modern glass and steel accents. Large windows offered glimpses of the luxurious interior, where crystal chandeliers cast golden light over tables draped in white linen. At the entrance, a meticulously landscaped garden lived up to the restaurant's name. Rose bushes bloomed in geometric flower beds, and a small fountain provided the gentle sound of running water. Uniformed valets rushed to open the doors of arriving Mercedes, BMWs, and Porsches. "Wow, Mom," whispered Victoria, her eyes wide. "It's even more beautiful than I imagined." It looks like a castle, agreed Isabel, equally awed. Yvette parked the car and took a deep breath. For some reason she couldn't explain, she felt butterflies in her stomach. She straightened her dress, checked to make sure the girls were presentable, and walked with them toward the entrance. The glass door opened automatically, revealing an interior that looked like it came out of a design magazine. The floor was polished Italian marble, the walls covered in textured wallpaper in neutral tones, and carefully selected artworks created elegant focal points. The aroma was a subtle blend of fresh flowers and expensive spices. At the reception desk, 24-year-old hostess Rachel Thompson looked up from her computer. She was a slim, blonde woman impeccably dressed in a black blazer that likely cost more than many people's monthly rent. Her eyes scanned Yvette and the girls from head to toe in a quick but thorough evaluation. Rachel had been trained to read clients instantly. It was a skill Bradley Morrison, the manager, considered essential for maintaining the establishment's standard. And what she saw at that moment made her uncomfortable. A Latina woman with two black children, all dressed casually. No flashy jewelry, no obvious designer handbags. None of the signs of wealth she had learned to associate with Le Jardin's proper clientele. From the main counter, Bradley Morrison observed the scene with the calculating gaze he had honed over a 15-year career in luxury hospitality. At 45 years old, Bradley had built his reputation on his ability to keep exclusive establishments truly exclusive. In his mind, that meant subtly discouraging guests who might lower the tone of the atmosphere. He approached Rachel and whispered, "This kind of clientele, did they check if we have availability?" "We're quite full today." Rachel nodded, perfectly understanding the coded message. "I'll check." Mr. Morrison Bradley looked at the family again. The woman was beautiful, the children well-behaved, but something bothered him. Maybe it was the fact that he didn't recognize them as regulars. Maybe it was the simplicity of their clothes. Or maybe it was simply the prejudice he had learned to disguise as professional standards. Rachel approached Yvette with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good afternoon. How can I help you?" "Good afternoon," Yvette replied politely. "We'd like a table for 3, please." "Do you have a reservation?" Rachel asked, even though she could clearly see the restaurant was only moderately busy. "No, but we were hoping to get a table. It's a special occasion. We're celebrating the girls' excellent grades." Rachel pretended to check something in her system, clicking the mouse unnecessarily several times. "Let me check our availability." "One moment." She stepped away to consult Bradley, who was already observing everything from a distance. "They don't have a reservation," Rachel whispered. "What should I do?" Bradley looked at the family again, then at the main dining area where clients in expensive suits and designer dresses dined quietly. "Table 15, he murmured, "in the back, near the hallway to the restrooms. If they're going to stay, let them be where they won't disturb the other customers." Meanwhile, Sarah Williams, the 28-year-old waitress responsible for that section, was observing the conversation between Rachel and Bradley. Sarah had worked at Le Jardin for 3 years and had learned to read the nonverbal language of management. She knew exactly what it meant when Bradley directed customers to table 15. It was the table they used for families they deemed unsuitable, but couldn't outright refuse without causing a scene. It was in a less prestigious area of the restaurant, poorly lit, with a view only of the hallway leading to the restrooms. It was a subtle way to discourage certain people from coming back. Sarah had her own opinions about that family. In her view, shaped by years of working in the restaurant's elitist atmosphere, they clearly didn't belong there. They had probably seen Le Jardin on some social network and decided to try their luck, without understanding that a place like that was for a specific kind of person. "Another family that doesn't know their place," Sarah murmured to Lisa, another waitress. "I bet they'll be shocked by the prices." Rachel returned to Yvette with a forced smile. "I got a table for you. You're lucky. We usually require a reservation. Please follow me." The walk to the table was a silent humiliation. Rachel led them through the longest possible route, passing all the well-positioned tables, those with views of the garden, near the windows where natural light created a welcoming atmosphere, where well-dressed patrons conversed softly about business and international travel. Victoria and Isabel took everything in with wide-eyed curiosity, discreetly pointing at the flower arrangements. The elaborate dishes, the sophisticated decor. It was a new world to them, and at first they seemed enchanted. At last they reached table 15. It was small, cramped between a structural column and the wall that separated the main dining room from the restroom hallway. The lighting was dim, provided only by a small table lamp. The noise of people constantly entering and exiting the restrooms was persistent and disturbing. "Here it is," Rachel said, not completely hiding the disdain in her voice. "I hope it's suitable." Yvette looked around and immediately understood what was happening. It wasn't her first experience with subtle discrimination, but she had hoped her daughters would never have to go through it. Her stomach twisted, but she forced a smile. "Thank you," she said simply, not wanting to make a scene in front of the girls. Victoria and Isabel sat down. But even at 11 years old, they could tell something was wrong. The difference between their table and the others was far too obvious to ignore. "Mom," Isabel whispered, "why is our table so different from the others? And why is it so noisy here?" added Victoria, making a face as someone ran past toward the bathroom. Yvette took a deep breath, struggling to maintain her composure. "Sometimes restaurants get full and have to use every available table, sweethearts. What matters is that we're together celebrating your achievements." But inside, her anger was growing, not because of the personal humiliation. She had learned to deal with that over the years, but for her daughters, for two innocent children who deserved to feel welcome and valued anywhere. Bradley watched from a distance, seemingly satisfied with the solution found. He approached Sarah Williams, who was arranging plates on a tray nearby. "Table 15 is your responsibility today," he said in a low voice. "And Sarah, be prudent. People like them sometimes have expectations beyond their means. Make sure they understand the prices before they order anything." Sarah nodded in understanding. She knew exactly what Bradley was implying. It was her job to subtly discourage the family, to make them feel uncomfortable enough not to return. "Leave it to me, Mr. Morrison," Sarah replied. "I know exactly how to handle this kind of situation." It was a conversation that had happened dozens of times over the years, whenever customers who didn't fit the desired profile showed up. Bradley had perfected the system, believing he was protecting the restaurant's image and exclusivity. For 20 long and awkward minutes, Sarah deliberately ignored table 15. Yvette and the girls watched as other tables were promptly attended to. Smiling waiters taking orders, explaining specials, suggesting wines. Some customers who had arrived after them were already being served. Sarah passed their table at least 6 times, always with an expression of haste, always looking elsewhere, always carrying plates or drinks to other people. It was a clear demonstration that they were not a priority. Victoria, with a child's natural impatience, finally broke the silence. "Mom, why isn't that lady coming to talk to us? We've been here for a long time." Isabel, always observant, added, "She's already helped all the other tables. Even that man who came after us already ordered food." Yvette felt her heart break. How could she explain to two 11-year-olds that they were being deliberately ignored? How could she protect their innocence without lying about the cruel reality of the world? "Maybe she's just very busy today, darlings," she said, even though she knew it was a lie. "Let's wait a little longer." Finally, Sarah approached the table with a barely disguised expression of impatience. She didn't introduce herself, didn't ask how they were, didn't offer water or bread. Basic courtesies she automatically extended to other customers. "Do you already know what you want?" she asked abruptly without even making eye contact. "Actually, we haven't seen the menu yet," Yvette replied, maintaining her politeness despite the rudeness. Sarah sighed loudly, as if it were a great inconvenience. "Sure, I'll get it." She walked away without hurry, stopping to chat with other staff along the way. When she finally returned, she tossed 3 menus onto the table without ceremony, causing water to splash from the glasses. "The prices are all there," she said, placing particular emphasis on the word prices. "I hope you checked our price range before choosing this restaurant." The implication was clear and offensive. She was suggesting that they might not be able to afford the food. Yvette felt her face flush with humiliation, but she maintained her composure in front of her daughters. Victoria and Isabel exchanged confused glances, clearly sensing something was wrong, but not quite understanding what. Thank you, Yvette said, her voice controlled. We'll take a look at the menu. Sarah walked away but remained close enough to watch their reactions to the prices. She returned to the counter where Bradley was waiting with curiosity. So? He asked. Just as I thought, Sarah replied with malicious satisfaction. They were shocked when they saw the prices. The woman went pale. They'll probably order just one appetizer to share or something like that. Bradley shook his head with a mix of disapproval and superiority. People like that should do some research before choosing where to eat. It's embarrassing for everyone involved when someone walks into a place that's above their means. They laughed quietly, unaware that their voices, though low, carried just enough to be partially heard by the family at table 15. Yvette opened the menu and, for a moment, felt relieved. The prices were high as expected, but perfectly affordable for her family. In fact, a single piece of jewelry she wore casually was worth more than dinner for 10 people. But that didn't matter. What mattered was the deliberate humiliation they were enduring. "Mom," Victoria whispered, "why did that lady talk about the prices like that?" Isabel, always direct, asked, "Does she think we're poor?" They were questions Yvette had hoped never to have to answer. How do you explain to children who live in a bubble of privilege that the world can be cruel to them simply because of their appearance? "Sometimes people make wrong assumptions about others, my loves," she said carefully. "That says more about them than about us." But inside, her anger was building. It wasn't fair that her daughters had to learn this lesson so early in such a cruel way. When Sarah finally returned to take their order, her attitude had become even more hostile. It was as if the conversation with Bradley had boosted her confidence in mistreating the family. "Have you decided what you want?" she asked, tapping her pen impatiently. "Yes," Yvette replied with dignity. "I'll have the grilled salmon with asparagus, and the girls would like the chicken with mashed potatoes." Sarah scribbled lazily, making faces as if she were being forced to do an unpleasant task. "And how do you plan to pay?" she asked abruptly. "Cash? Card? Because if it's a card, I should warn you that our machine sometimes has issues with, let's say, lesser-known cards." The question was doubly offensive. First, because no decent restaurant asks about payment methods before even serving the food. Second, because the insinuation about lesser-known cards was clearly a reference to the family's presumed financial status. "Credit card," Yvette replied, struggling to remain calm. "Are you sure it'll go through?" Sarah pressed maliciously. "Because if it doesn't, we'll have a serious problem." Victoria and Isabel were now visibly uncomfortable. They might not fully understand the details of the discrimination they were facing, but they knew the treatment they were receiving was different and wrong. They looked around at other tables, where families were being served with smiles, where servers explained dishes in detail, where children their age seemed happy and at ease. The contrast was too stark to ignore. "Mom," Victoria whispered, her eyes beginning to fill with tears. "Why is she being so mean to us?" "Did we do something wrong?" Isabel asked in a tiny voice. Yvette felt her heart shatter. How do you explain to two innocent children that they were being punished for something they couldn't control? Their appearance, their age, the ignorant prejudices of adults who should know better. "No, my loves," she said, her voice trembling with restrained emotion. "You didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes grown-ups behave badly, and that has nothing to do with you." But she knew that explanation wasn't enough. She knew her daughters would carry this experience as a scar in their childhood memories. The food took 45 minutes to arrive, an absurdly long time for simple dishes. During that time, Yvette observed other tables that had ordered after them receiving their meals first. It was a clear demonstration that they were the kitchen's last priority. When Sarah finally brought the dishes, she placed them on the table carelessly, making unnecessary noise and splashing sauce on the tablecloth. "Grilled salmon and 2 chickens," she announced curtly, without asking if they needed anything else, without checking if everything was okay, without showing any interest in their well-being. "Could we have some more water, please?" Yvette asked politely. Sarah sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes. "Of course. Anything else special?" The sarcasm in her tone was unmistakable, loaded with implications about excessive demands. The twins began eating in silence. clearly without appetite. What should have been a joyful celebration had turned into a traumatic experience they were trying to process with their 11-year-old minds. As they ate, Yvette noticed Sarah making comments to other staff members, always glancing toward their table. It was impossible to hear the exact words, but the body language was clear. Muffled laughter, looks of disdain. At one point, Sarah passed near their table carrying plates for other customers, and Yvette clearly heard her say to another waiter, "Some people really should research better before choosing where to eat. There are more appropriate places for each kind of family." The sentence was spoken loud enough to be heard, and Yvette knew it was absolutely intentional. It was the final blow, a public humiliation meant to make it very clear that they were not welcome. Victoria stopped eating and looked at her mother with tears in her eyes. "Mom, she's talking about us, isn't she?" That was the moment Yvette realized she could no longer protect her daughters from the cruelty they were witnessing. Isabel, always the more direct of the two, asked the question that broke Yvette's heart. "Mom, are we poor? Is that why she doesn't like us?" Yvette closed her eyes for a moment, fighting back tears. Her daughters, who had been raised in an environment of unconditional love and material abundance, were questioning their own worth because of strangers' ignorance and prejudice. "No, my love," said Yvette, her voice trembling but firm. "You are not poor, and even if you were, that would never give anyone the right to treat you badly. A person's worth is not in how much money they have, but in the kind of person they are." "Then why is she being mean?" insisted Victoria. "Because some people grow up learning the wrong things," Yvette explained, carefully choosing her words. "They learn to judge others by their skin color, by the clothes they wear, by what they assume about them. It's wrong, but it happens." "But it's not fair," protested Isabel, with the pure indignation of childhood. "No, it's not fair," Yvette agreed. "And that's why good people need to fight against those things when they grow up." Bradley Morrison approached the table with a fake smile that couldn't hide his impatience. "Everything all right here? Is the food to your liking?" It was clearly an attempt to hurry them along, disguised as professional courtesy. "Yes, thank you," replied Yvette with dignity. "Great, great," said Bradley, rubbing his hands together. "Sarah can bring you the check then. I know you must be getting on with your plans." Yvette hadn't asked for the check, but the message was clear. It was time to leave. They had been tolerated long enough. "All right," said Yvette. "You may bring the check." When Sarah brought the check, she stood by the table in a defensive posture, clearly waiting to see if the card would be approved. It was an unnecessary final humiliation, as if she expected the payment to fail so she could finally have a reason to create a scene. The card went through without any issues, of course. Yvette had more than enough credit to buy the entire restaurant if she wanted to, but that didn't matter to those who had judged her family based on prejudice and assumptions. Yvette left a 20% tip, not because Sarah deserved it, but because she didn't want to give any reason for more negative comments about her family. As they got up to leave, Sarah made her final comment, loud enough for several people to hear. "Some people should eat at home, not in places like this. It would be better for everyone." The walk to the parking lot was silent and heavy. Victoria and Isabel were visibly shaken, and Yvette struggled to hold back her own tears until they were out of the restaurant's prying eyes. In the car, the emotional floodgates finally opened. The twins began to cry, and Yvette could no longer maintain the facade of strength. "Mom," sobbed Victoria, "why were those people so mean to us? What did we do wrong?" "I don't understand," cried Isabel. "We tried to be polite. We didn't make a mess. We didn't bother anyone." Yvette pulled the car into a nearby parking lot and turned to her daughters. It was impossible to fully shield them from the world's harsh realities, but she could at least help them process the experience. "Listen closely, my darlings," she said, taking their hands. "You did nothing wrong, absolutely nothing. Those people behave badly because they are prejudiced. They judge others by skin color, age, the clothes they wear, by things that don't really matter." "But why, Mom?" asked Victoria through her tears. "Because some people grow up believing they are better than others," Yvette explained, "and that makes them act cruelly toward those they see as different." With her hands trembling from anger and sadness, Yvette picked up the phone and dialed Michael. He was in an important meeting with investors discussing a new business project. but he always answered when family called. It was a rule he had set years ago. Family always comes first. "Hi, love," said Michael, his voice warm and relaxed. "How was the celebration lunch for my girls?" Yvette tried to steady her voice, took several deep breaths, but couldn't hide the emotion that was overtaking her. "Michael," she began, and her voice cracked. Michael immediately sensed that something was terribly wrong. In 15 years of marriage, he knew every nuance of his wife's voice. "What happened?" he asked, already rising from the conference table and motioning for the investors to wait. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" "Physically, we're fine," Yvette replied, her voice faltering. "But Michael, I took the girls to Le Jardin to celebrate their outstanding grades, and we were treated in a way that was horrible." Michael felt a cold chill run down his spine. He knew that restaurant, had dined there several times with Yvette at social events. They had always been treated like royalty. "Tell me everything," he said, his voice growing more serious. "From the beginning." Yvette told him everything in painful detail. The table isolated at the back of the restaurant near the bathrooms, the discriminatory service that lasted over an hour, the remarks about their ability to pay, the deliberate humiliation in front of others, and most of all, the devastating impact it had on the girls. "Michael, they're asking if we're poor, if they did something wrong to deserve that treatment," said Yvette, her voice breaking again. "Victoria asked if it's because our skin is darker. Isabel wants to know if she should wear different clothes to be accepted. They're questioning their own worth because of those people's cruelty." Michael listened in silence, but Yvette could feel the tension building on the other end of the line. She knew the signs: the more controlled breathing, the silence that came before the storm. "What were their names?" asked Michael, his voice dangerously calm. "The manager's name is Bradley Morrison. The waitress is Sarah Williams." "And where are you now?" "In the parking lot of a cafe near the restaurant. The girls are still trying to understand what happened." Michael closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Instantly, his mind traveled back to his own childhood in Wilmington, North Carolina. He remembered his mother, Dolores Jordan, being followed by security guards in expensive stores. He remembered being ignored in restaurants until people recognized who he was. He remembered the humiliation of having his humanity questioned before he even opened his mouth. But that more painful memory was different. At 12 years old, he had saved money for months doing extra work to buy a birthday gift for his mother. When they arrived at the department store, the clerk completely ignored them, serving white customers who arrived after them. When he finally did assist them, he questioned whether they had money to pay, suggesting they look for something cheaper. That day, Michael had made a silent promise. When he grew up, when he had power and resources, he would make sure his family never went through that again. The difference now was that it was his daughters. His 11-year-old girls were experiencing the same cruelty he had faced, but which he had sworn to protect them from. "Yvette," said Michael, his voice firm and determined, "I want you all to go to Cafe Luna on the corner and wait for me there. I'm canceling all my appointments and I'm on my way now." "Michael, what are you planning to do?" asked Yvette, recognizing that tone in his voice. "Something that should have been done a long time ago," Michael replied. "I'm going to teach those people a lesson about respect and human dignity." "Please don't do anything that will embarrass the girls even more," Yvette pleaded. "Love, trust me. I won't embarrass anyone. I'm going to educate." Michael hung up the phone and immediately called his personal assistant. "Marcus, cancel all my appointments today. I need the limousine in 5 minutes, and I want you to come with me." "Is something wrong, Mr. Jordan?" "Yes, Marcus. A problem I'm going to deal with personally today." During the 20-minute drive from the office to downtown Charlotte, Michael reflected deeply on the incident. It wasn't the first time he had heard stories like this. In fact, he knew that Black and Latino families faced this kind of discrimination constantly. The difference was that his fame and fortune usually protected him. People recognized him instantly and treated him with reverence, not out of genuine respect for his humanity, but because of interest in his celebrity and wealth. But his daughters didn't have that protection, and even if they did, that wasn't how he wanted the world to work. He didn't want his daughters to be respected only because they were Michael Jordan's daughters. He wanted them to be respected because they were human beings. Marcus, Michael said during the ride, I want you to record everything that happens today. We might need this documentation later. Of course, Mr. Jordan. May I ask exactly what we're doing? We're going to give a lesson on human dignity to some people who clearly never learned it. Michael met Yvette and the twins at Cafe Luna, a cozy, familiar place where they felt safe. Victoria and Isabel ran to hug him as soon as they saw him, their eyes still red from crying so much. Daddy, said Victoria, clinging to his neck, why were those people so mean to us? Michael knelt down to be at eye level with his daughters, looking straight into their eyes. Because some people judge others by appearance, not by character. But that's not right, and we're not going to let it go. What are we going to do? Asked Isabel, wiping her nose. We're going back there, all of us together as a family. And we're going to teach those people a very important lesson about how to treat other human beings. Yvette looked at her husband with a mix of pride and concern. Michael, the girls have already been through enough. I don't want to expose them to more trauma. It won't be traumatic, love, Michael assured her, taking Yvette's hands. It's going to be educational. They're going to see how people should react when they witness injustice. They'll learn that we mustn't accept discrimination in silence. He turned to his daughters. Girls, do you trust Daddy? Of course, they said in unison. Then let me show you how we respond to cruelty, with dignity and education. 15 minutes later, Michael Jordan's armored black limousine slowly pulled up in front of Le Jardin. The vehicle, a custom Maybach that cost more than a house, immediately drew the attention of pedestrians, restaurant patrons, and staff who watched through the large windows. Bradley Morrison was checking some tables when he noticed the commotion outside. Limousines weren't rare at Le Jardin, but they always meant very important clients. The kind of people who generated stories he'd tell for years. Sarah, Bradley called excitedly, come see this. Looks like we have a very special guest arriving. Sarah approached the window, instinctively smoothing her uniform and checking her makeup in the glass reflection. Limo clients always meant generous tips and impressive stories to tell friends. Who do you think it is? She asked, curious. I don't know, but you can be sure it'll be nothing like those troublesome people from earlier, Bradley replied with satisfaction. This is the kind of clientele that truly belongs here. The limo door opened, and Michael Jordan stepped out in full splendor. At 6'6", wearing a perfectly tailored Armani suit, his presence was impossible to ignore. Immediately, murmurs of recognition spread among the pedestrians. It's Michael Jordan, someone on the sidewalk shouted. The greatest basketball player of all time, exclaimed another. Oh my God, it's really him. A small crowd began to gather, people taking photos with their phones, some shouting to try to get his attention. Michael waved politely but stayed focused on his mission. Bradley and Sarah were ecstatic. Michael Jordan was exactly the kind of client they dreamed of serving. His presence at the restaurant would be a story they'd tell for decades, a stamp of approval they could use in marketing for years. Oh my God, Sarah whispered, almost breathless. It's really Michael Jordan. I'm going to get an autograph. Maybe a photo. Bradley was already mentally calculating how to use the visit to promote the restaurant, imagining social media posts and features in food magazines. But then, their joy turned into absolute horror. Yvette stepped out of the limousine, carefully followed by Victoria and Isabel. The three of them wore the same outfits as before, the simple yet elegant dresses that had been deemed inappropriate just 2 hours earlier. Bradley and Sarah instantly recognized the family they had humiliated. The manager felt as if the ground had vanished beneath his feet, while Sarah turned completely pale, her mouth opening in silent shock. No! This can't be happening, Sarah murmured, her voice barely audible. Bradley felt nausea rising in his stomach. The family they had treated as unworthy, deliberately humiliated, and tried to discourage was Michael Jordan's family. The man they were prepared to flatter and fawn over was the husband and father of the very people they had discriminated against based on ignorant prejudice. Sarah, Bradley whispered desperately, grabbing her arm. What are we going to do? What the hell are we going to do? Sarah was in complete panic, visibly trembling. I don't know. Maybe they don't exactly remember what happened. Maybe we can pretend that it was a pathetic and baseless hope. How could anyone forget such a deliberate and systematic humiliation? Michael walked toward the restaurant entrance with Yvette by his side and the twins holding his hands. His posture was dignified, yet determined, and anyone who knew him well would recognize that expression. It was the same one he had during the decisive moments of the most important games in his career. The crowd that had gathered on the sidewalk followed them with their eyes, many recording videos and taking pictures. Some tried to get closer for autographs, but Marcus, Michael's assistant, politely kept them at a respectful distance. Bradley tried to hide behind the main counter, but knew it was useless. Sarah considered running to the bathroom and locking herself in until it was all over, but her feet seemed rooted to the marble floor. When Michael reached the main door, all conversation in the restaurant ceased instantly. The silence was so deep that one could hear the soft sound of background music and the distant clinking of cutlery in the kitchen. All customers, staff, and onlookers were suspended in anticipation, instinctively sensing something extraordinary was about to happen. Michael paused at the entrance, his eyes scanning the room until they found Bradley, who was trying to make himself invisible behind the counter. "Good afternoon," Michael said, his voice carrying natural but controlled authority. "I would like to speak with everyone present, if possible." Bradley approached trembling, trying to force a professional smile that looked more like a grimace of pain. "Mr. Jordan," he said, his voice slightly faltering, "it is an honor to have you at our establishment. I am Bradley Morrison, the general manager. How can we serve you today?" Michael looked at him with an expression that made Bradley swallow hard and instinctively step back. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison. Actually, we are already familiar with the quality of service at this establishment. My wife and daughters were here earlier today." The little color left in Bradley's face vanished completely. His hands began to shake, and he had to lean on the counter to avoid staggering. I wasn't not aware. I would like to speak with everyone present," Michael repeated calmly, ignoring Bradley's pathetic attempt to feign ignorance. "Staff, customers, every person in this restaurant. I have something very important to share with you." Michael's tone was not threatening, but there was an authority in it that made everyone in the restaurant stop what they were doing. Waiters dropped trays at nearby tables, customers paused conversations mid-sentence. Even the kitchen sounds quieted down. Michael positioned himself in the center of the main dining room, where everyone could see him clearly. Yvette stood by his side, keeping Victoria and Isabel close, her hands protectively on the girl's shoulders. The twins watched everything with wide eyes, still processing the shift in atmosphere of the place that had rejected them hours earlier. The restaurant was in absolute silence. Even the usual murmur of a luxury restaurant had ceased entirely. It was as if everyone instinctively knew they were about to witness something meaningful. "My name is Michael Jordan," he began, although everyone already knew it. "And these are my wife Yvette and my daughters Victoria and Isabel." He made a deliberate pause, allowing his eyes to sweep over every face in the room, from curious customers to nervous staff, from terrified Bradley to Sarah, who silently cried near the wall. "Today my family came here for lunch to celebrate something very special. The excellent grades my daughters received at school. It was supposed to be a moment of joy, pride, and family celebration. Unfortunately, it turned into a painful and unnecessary lesson about prejudice, discrimination, and human cruelty." Michael continued, his voice clear and controlled, but full of emotion. "My wife and daughters were deliberately seated at the least valued table in the restaurant, a small, noisy table at the back, near the bathrooms. They were ignored for over 20 minutes while other families who arrived after them were served first. When they were finally served, they were questioned about their ability to pay before even eating, and they heard humiliating remarks about not belonging to a place like this. Murmurs of shock and indignation began spreading throughout the dining room. Customers exchanged looks, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Others looked directly at Bradley and Sarah with expressions of condemnation. "And do you know why this happened?" Michael continued, his voice growing stronger. "Because some people in this establishment looked at my wife and my daughters, two 11-year-old children, and judged they were not suitable to be here. Based on what? The color of our skin? The casual but respectable clothes they wore? The arrogant and ignorant assumption that we didn't have enough money?" Victoria and Isabel watched their father with a mixture of admiration and relief. Finally, someone was standing up for them, explaining that the treatment they received was wrong. Yvette gently squeezed the girl's shoulders, proud of the courage and dignity Michael displayed. "I want everyone here to understand something very important," Michael said, his voice echoing through the silent room. "I grew up poor. My mother, Dolores Jordan, worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs at once to put food on our table and keep a roof over our heads. I know exactly what it feels like to be judged by appearance, to be followed in stores by suspicious security guards, to have your dignity questioned by people who consider themselves superior based on nothing but prejudice and ignorance." He paused, allowing his words to resonate. "I thought my position in society, my success, my fame, could protect my family from these humiliating experiences. I was completely wrong, and that made me realize something fundamental. If this can happen to us, imagine how many other families go through this daily without a platform to defend themselves." Michael turned slightly to look directly at his daughters. "Victoria, Isabel, I want you to look around this room. See all these people listening closely. Do you know why we are here talking about this publicly?" Victoria, always brave, answered clearly, "To teach about respect, Daddy?" "Exactly, my love. Because the value of a person, any person, is not in what they wear, the car they drive, the size of their bank account, or the color of their skin. Value is in the way we treat other human beings, especially those we consider different or less fortunate than ourselves." Isabel timidly raised her hand. "Daddy, is that why that lady was mean to us? Because she thought we were different?" "Yes, dear. And do you know what's even sadder? Even if our family were poor, even if we couldn't afford this meal, that would never give anyone the right to treat us with disrespect or cruelty." Michael addressed the crowded hall again. "I want to share a personal story that few people know. When I was exactly the age of my daughters, 11 years old, my mother saved money for 3 months, doing extra cleaning and sewing jobs, to buy me a new pair of sneakers for the start of the school year. We went to a department store in our city, and the salesperson completely ignored us for 40 minutes, serving white customers who arrived long after we did. His voice grew stronger, filled with emotion. When he finally attended to us, the first thing he did was question whether we had the money to pay for the sneakers. Then he suggested we look for something cheaper in another section of the store. That day I felt a humiliation that etched itself into my soul forever. But I also learned something I carry to this day. When you achieve status and resources in life, you have 2 choices. You can use that status to feel superior to others, or you can use it to make sure no one else goes through what you went through." Michael called Bradley by name. "Mr. Morrison, could you please come forward?" Bradley walked slowly, as if walking toward his own judgment. His legs visibly trembled, and he had to make a conscious effort to breathe. "Mr. Morrison, when my family arrived here today for the first time, what was exactly your first impression?" Bradley stammered, trying to find words that wouldn't sound like a confession of guilt. I don't remember exactly." "Please be honest," Michael insisted, but without aggression. "I'm not here to destroy your career. I'm here to educate. So help me educate these people by being completely transparent. What went through your mind when you saw my wife and daughters enter?" Bradley took a deep breath, knowing there was no escape. I thought maybe they weren't our usual kind of clientele," he admitted, voice barely audible. "And what did you base that conclusion on specifically?" On their appearance," Bradley admitted, looking down at the floor. "Go on," Michael encouraged. "In what aspect of their appearance?" "They were dressed more casually, and I assumed maybe they didn't have the means to eat here," Michael finished. "Because in your mind, people with darker skin, dressed casually, are automatically poor and don't belong in places like this." Bradley nodded miserably, unable to deny the obvious. Michael turned to Sarah. "Miss Williams, right? Could you please come forward as well?" Sarah approached openly crying, trembling like a leaf in the wind. Her co-workers watched her with a mixture of pity and embarrassment. "Miss Williams, when you questioned my family's ability to pay the bill even before we served the food, What specifically made you ask that question? Sarah couldn't speak through the tears. Michael waited patiently, without pressing her aggressively. Please answer, he said gently. I'm not here to humiliate you. I'm here for all of us to learn something important. I, I assume that. Maybe they didn't have the means, Sarah whispered between sobs. Based on what? Michael asked. I, I don't know. It was wrong. Very, very wrong. But you must have had some reason to make that assumption. Help me understand your thought process. Sarah took a deep breath, struggling to find words. Because they didn't look like our usual customers. They didn't have expensive jewelry, designer bags, and I thought, that Black and Latino people are automatically poor unless they prove otherwise, Michael completed. Is that it? Sarah nodded, completely defeated. Michael looked around the entire hall again. I want everyone here to understand something fundamental. I'm not here to humiliate these people or seek personal revenge. I'm here because my 11-year-old daughter asked me in tears if she is poor, because my other daughter questioned whether she had done something wrong to deserve being treated cruelly, because two innocent children are now questioning their own worth because of the ignorance and prejudice of adults who should protect them, not hurt them. His voice became more emotional. No father or mother should have to explain to a child why adults were cruel to them because of their skin color or the clothes they wear. No child should question their own value, their own dignity, because of the ignorance of others. And no family should have to prove they deserve basic respect by showing credit cards or wearing expensive clothes. Michael continued, do you know what the true measure of a person's character is? How they treat those who can do nothing for them. How they treat a child, an elderly person, someone they consider inferior socially or economically. How they treat people when they think no important person is watching. That reveals who you really are, not the pretty words you say when you want to impress someone. He addressed Bradley and Sarah specifically. You two judged my family based on prejudiced assumptions and treated them accordingly. But here's the cruel irony. If I had come in alone first, without my family, how would I have been received? Bradley swallowed hard before answering. Very well, Mr. Jordan. We would have given you the best table, the best service. Exactly, and why? Because they would recognize me. Because they know I have money and fame. But what if I were just Michael, an ordinary Black man, a family father, trying to celebrate his daughter's achievements? How would I be treated then? The silence that followed answered the question better than any words. Michael knelt again to be at eye level with his daughters. Victoria, Isabel, I want you to remember this lesson for the rest of your lives. True success isn't about having more money than others, or living in bigger houses, or wearing expensive clothes. True success is about using what you have, whether much or little, to make the world a better place. It's about making sure other children don't go through what you went through today, Victoria asked, with the clarity typical of children. Dad, but how do we do that? How do we help other children? By treating all people with respect and kindness, no matter their appearance. By being friends with kids who are different from you. And when you see someone being treated badly, whether at school, on the street, anywhere, having the courage to say something, to stand up for that person. Isabel added, even if the person is mean to us first? Especially then, my love. Because when we respond to cruelty with more cruelty, the cycle never ends. But when we answer with dignity, politeness, and firmness, we can plant seeds that change hearts and minds. Michael stood up and headed back to the hall. I want to share something I've learned throughout my career in life. When I was at the peak of my basketball career, I had access to anywhere in the world. Any restaurant, any event, any exclusive place. People treated me like royalty wherever I went, but I never forgot where I came from. Never forgot what it's like to be ignored, underestimated, judged by appearance. He paused meaningfully. And you know what I discovered over the years? The people who impressed me the most weren't those dazzled by my fame or intimidated by my money. They were the ones who treated everyone well. The janitor, the cleaner, the delivery person, the shy child, the lonely elderly. Those people had true class, true manners, true character. Michael looked directly at David Chen, the restaurant owner, who had quietly arrived during the speech and was observing everything from the back of the hall with a serious expression. "Mr. Chen, I assume you are the owner of this establishment?" David approached nervously, clearly aware of the gravity of the situation. "Yes, Mr. Jordan. I'm David Chen, owner of Le Jardin. I want to deeply and sincerely apologize for what happened to your family today." "Thank you, Mr. Chen. But it's not only to me that you should apologize. It's to all the families who likely had similar experiences here and at other places across the country. Families who never had a platform to stand up for themselves." David nodded gravely. "You are absolutely right. This is unacceptable and cannot continue happening." Michael continued. "Mr. Chen, I'm going to ask you some direct questions, and I ask you to answer honestly. How many Black or Latino employees work in customer-facing positions at your establishment?" David hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the question. "Well, we hire based on qualifications and experience." "I'm not questioning qualifications," Michael interrupted politely. "I'm specifically asking about racial diversity, because a diverse workplace naturally reduces unconscious biases. When you have employees from different ethnic and socioeconomic backgrounds, they better understand the experiences of diverse customers and are less likely to make assumptions based on appearance." David nodded thoughtfully. "I completely understand your point, Mr. Jordan. I recognize that our team doesn't reflect the diversity of our community. We will immediately reassess our hiring and recruitment practices. What is your current policy regarding diversity and inclusion training?" "Honestly, we don't have a formal policy on that." "And do you have any protocol for handling discrimination complaints?" David lowered his head. "No, Mr. Jordan. Clearly we have failed in fundamental areas." Sarah, who had been silent for most of the speech, finally found the courage to speak. "Mr. Jordan," her voice was hoarse from crying, "there are no excuses for what I did today. There is no justification in the world." "Mr. Jordan," her voice was hoarse from crying, "there are no excuses for what I did today. There is no justification in the world. I was raised in a way that made me believe terrible and wrong things about people who didn't look like me. But that's no excuse for hurting a child." Michael looked at her attentively, recognizing the sincerity in her confession. "Miss Williams, I deeply appreciate your honesty and courage to admit that publicly. But I want you to understand something important. Prejudice is not an innate trait. It is learned. And if it can be learned, it can be unlearned." Sarah nodded vigorously. "How, Mr. Jordan? How can I change? How can I make sure I never hurt a child like that again?" "By starting exactly as you just did, recognizing and admitting your biases without trying to justify them. Then making a conscious and deliberate effort to meet people different from you, listening to their stories, understanding their experiences, seeing them as complex and unique human beings, not stereotypes." Michael turned to Bradley. "Mr. Morrison, how long have you been in this management position?" 12 years, Mr. Jordan. In 12 years in this role, how many times have you instructed employees to treat customers differently based on appearance, race, or assumptions about socioeconomic status?" Bradley lowered his head, clearly embarrassed. "More times than I'd like to admit, Mr. Jordan." "And what was your justification for those instructions?" I thought I was protecting the restaurant's image, that I was maintaining a certain standard of clientele that our regular customers expected." Michael shook his head sadly. "Mr. Morrison, true class and true standards are not about excluding people or creating artificial hierarchies based on appearance. True elegance is about including everyone with dignity and grace. The highest standard any establishment can achieve is making every person who walks in feel valued and respected, regardless of who they are." An elderly lady in the hall, who had been silently observing everything, timidly raised her hand. Michael noticed and nodded for her to speak. "Mr. Jordan, may I say something?" "Of course, ma'am, please." "I have been coming here for over 5 years. I'm a widow. Sometimes I come alone because it's a beautiful place and I feel less lonely. And I must say, I have witnessed situations similar to what you described, other families being treated differently. I never said anything because, well, it wasn't directly to me, and I didn't want to get involved. Michael nodded appreciatively. Thank you for your honesty, ma'am, and I completely understand your dilemma. But that's exactly why we're having this public conversation. Injustice and discrimination thrive when good, well-intentioned people stay silent. Not because they are bad, but because they don't know how to act or are afraid of the consequences. The lady continued. Next time, Mr. Jordan, I will speak up. I promise. You gave me the courage to do the right thing. That gives me hope, ma'am. Real change happens when people like you decide that the dignity of others matters more than our own convenience. A well-dressed middle-aged man stood up at a nearby table. Mr. Jordan, I work in human resources for a large company here in Charlotte. I can honestly say that the kind of discrimination you described happens in many places, not just restaurants, offices, stores, schools, hospitals. It's more common than we like to admit. Exactly, Michael agreed. And that's why this conversation is so important. It's not about this specific restaurant or these particular people. It's about how we create a society where every child, every person, can enter any place and be treated with the basic dignity every human being deserves. The man nodded. I will implement similar trainings at my company next week. You've opened my eyes to things I was ignoring. A young mother with a small child also stood up. Mr. Jordan, my son is biracial. He's still little, but I'm already worried about the experiences he will have when he grows up. Thank you for speaking on behalf of all our children. Michael looked lovingly at his daughters. Victoria, Isabel, do you have any questions about what happened today? About what we're doing here? Victoria raised her hand as if in school. Dad, are all the people who treat us badly bad people at heart? It was a deep question for an 11-year-old, and Michael considered his answer carefully. No, my love. Some people are genuinely cruel and mean, but most, like Miss Williams here, are people who simply never learn better. They grew up in environments that taught them wrong things about different people. But when confronted with the truth, when they see the impact of their actions, many are able to change and grow. Isabel asked, and if someone is mean to us again, what should we do? First, always keep your dignity. Never respond to cruelty with more cruelty or disrespect. Second, talk to me and your mother, always, so we can handle the situation together. Third, always remember that other people's cruel behavior says a lot about them, but nothing about you. Michael addressed the room again. I want to make something absolutely clear to everyone here. I didn't come today to ruin careers, close businesses, or seek personal revenge. I came to turn a painful moment into an opportunity for education and growth for all of us. He looked specifically at David Chen. Mr. Chen, instead of punishments or negative consequences, I would like to suggest something constructive and positive. How about implementing a comprehensive training program on diversity, inclusion, and cultural sensitivity? Not just for your employees, but open to the entire business community of Charlotte? David seemed simultaneously relieved and interested. It would be an honor, Mr. Jordan. How could we structure something like that? We would start by bringing people from different ethnic, socioeconomic, and cultural backgrounds to share their personal experiences with discrimination. We would teach employees to recognize and confront unconscious biases. We would create clear, specific policies about equal treatment and establish protocols for handling discrimination when it occurs. Sarah approached again, wiping away tears. Mr. Jordan, I would very much like to be part of that program. I want to learn, I want to grow, I want to make sure I never make a child feel the way I made your daughters feel today. Michael smiled genuinely for the first time since entering the restaurant. That fills me with hope, Miss Williams. Real and lasting change starts with people like you, who have the courage to admit mistakes and seek genuine personal growth. Bradley also came forward. Mr. Jordan, I would also like to participate. I realize now that my leadership position gave me the responsibility to create a welcoming and inclusive environment for everyone, and I miserably failed in that responsibility. I want to learn how to lead better. Mr. Morrison, true leadership is about serving all people equally, not about keeping some out to please others. I'm glad you're willing to grow. Lucas, a young kitchen worker, timidly approached the group. Mr. Jordan, I'm Lucas. I've worked in the kitchen for 2 years. I'm black too, and, well, sometimes I hear comments from the front staff. I never knew if I should say something or if it was better to keep my head down so I wouldn't lose my job. Michael placed an encouraging hand on the young man's shoulder. Lucas, your voice matters just as much as anyone else's. In fact, maybe it matters even more because you're inside here. You see what happens behind the scenes. You know the internal culture. Employees like you can be the eyes and ears of positive change. Lucas nodded with growing determination. I will speak up next time, Mr. Jordan, I promise. I won't stay silent anymore when I see injustice. And when you speak up, Lucas, remember, you're not causing trouble or drama. You're solving problems and protecting people who deserve protection. Michael looked around the room one last time, observing the attentive and emotional faces of those present. I want to end with a personal reflection. Today, my family had a painful and unnecessary experience. But if this experience results in changes that prevent other families from going through the same suffering, then every tear shed, every moment of pain will have been worth it. He took Victoria and Isabel's hands. Girls, I want you to carry this lesson forever. You have the power to choose how to respond to life's hardships. You can allow the cruelty of others to diminish you, or you can use those experiences to become defenders of the dignity of others. Victoria wiped away a tear and said, Let's help other children, Daddy, so no one feels like we felt today. Isabel added, and let's always remember that we are valuable no matter what others say. If this story about courage, dignity, and the transformative power of family love touched your heart, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories that show how small acts of bravery can change the world. Together, we can build a society where every child feels valued and respected.